let's jump right in. I'm gonna, obviously have a list of questions that we can go through and talk about things, but I'm gonna kind of jump around because I think there's certain questions I really want to hear answers on a little bit more than others. So I'll start with this one. There's often a stigma with the Black and Brown community regarding seeking mental health, and that comes with a lot of things regarding us being viewed or being afraid to be viewed as weak, especially in the professional workspace. How have you guys experienced that in your own personal lives, and how that's your career, and how that's affected your career in terms of whether you thought it was accessible for you to get mental health help or not?
Okay, so I will start. Again, my name is Shanti Das. I'm from Atlanta, had a really great career in the entertainment industry, helping to launch the careers of folks like Usher and Outkast and TLC. And I had a really great run in the 90s and 2000s. And back then, people weren't really talking about mental health, especially in the workplace. And it was the more hours you worked, the more you were celebrated, right? It was hashtag team no sleep. The one thing I think that is important to mention is that my father died by suicide when I was 7 months old, and that was really devastating on our family. Even within our family, we didn't talk about it, right? There was still so much stigma from a community level with the Black family and in the workplace. And so it made me kind of clam up, and I was really embarrassed, Charles. I didn't want to talk about what I was going through. I didn't want to deal with all that unresolved trauma from my father's suicide and thinking something was wrong with me, even though I had this great career in entertainment. And so fast forward, I had serious suicidal ideation in 2015 after I had walked away from a big career in the entertainment industry and almost took my own life, and finally got the help that I needed. And I said, you know what, I'm not going to be quiet about this any longer. Our people are hurting. And this is pre-pandemic, again, around 2015, 2016. And I started talking openly. I call it digital journaling and sharing on social media. And the number of people that hit me on DM, whether it was music execs, artists, family members, friends, colleagues, was overwhelming. And so I knew there was a real need to bring this conversation to the forefront. And that's why I created my organization, Silence to Shame, and really started to try to teach the African-American community about the need to just be vulnerable, for them to understand that it's okay. And we see that tide shifting now, but I do think there is still a lot of stigma there, whether it's in the workplace or within our homes and within our families.
No problem. Thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so to jump in, my experience with mental health and the stigma in our community, one, working in the human resources space, I have to be an advocate, right, for any organization I work for, to present resources to the workforce to say, hey, leadership, their role is to build relationships with employees so employees can then feel comfortable, right? So when you think about it from a Black person's perspective, historically, we have not felt safe in these spaces to be able to be vulnerable. So as an advocate for mental health, personal life, professional life, to me, it's about presenting the resources, creating that awareness. And then I think that will start to remove the stigma. As stated before, the more we know, when you know better, you can do better. So I think for me, it's about creating a safe space so people can be vulnerable to talk about things. And I think that's one of the bigger ways that we can break the stigma, is simply by talking about what's going on and then coming up with solutions and options as to how we can support one another.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I'll add to, my industry is very male dominant, right? Motorsports industry. And, you fast cars and just very strong, gotta have a strong mentality. And you have a lot of people that come in nowadays. And like we said earlier, this wasn't talked about, a handful of years ago. You just kind of dealt with it and showed up to work and got the job done. Well, I think now it's becoming more prominent and a topic of discussion. And like Darlene said, they don't feel safe in their environment. So, starting our new team with 2311 Racing, one of my biggest things was making it feel like it's family. Like when you show up, it's not work. Obviously we got to build race cars and make them as fast as we can and make sure they're capable of winning and all this stuff. That's the obvious. But I think the more you can vibe with your team and act like family, because realistically in our sport, we spend more time with our race teams than we do our actual families. And so, when you're in that environment, you have to feel comfortable. I know a lot of people, I'm sure there's a lot of people on my team that probably keep a lot of stuff hidden, because they probably have that ideology of it's weak. It's, we can't talk about this because, I was raised that if I get a bump in my head, we just move on about it. We don't talk about it. We don't see a doctor. We don't do anything. So we just deal with it. And so it's hard to break those people, but I think it's for our generation now and generations to come of understanding like, hey, it's cool to talk about. So you just got to continue to make that a safe spot.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of those points. And I know you had already kind of touched on your personal journey in some ways with mental health, but if you each could give, I guess, a little bit more background or more of an understanding of kind of how you navigated your mental health journey and whether you have decided to seek help in some way, or what's factored into whether you made a decision to do that or not. If you could all touch on that a little bit more, that'd be helpful too.
Yeah,
Sure, I'll jump in on this one. So personally, when I think through my mental health journey, so I'm a Christian. I have a religious background. I go to church. I come from a family where typically we would pray about our problems, So 2021 was one of the toughest years for me after the pandemic. And going through the pandemic, like many of us, we were suffering through a lot of emotional roller coasters, if you will, from losing family members, losing jobs, whatever it may be. And at this time, I had just lost my job. I was in a car accident. There was just so much happening. And I felt that I just couldn't go to God. I needed a physical source here to help me navigate these issues. And then resurfacing childhood trauma was coming up. So I said, you know what? It's time, and I'm going to seek a therapist. And that's what I did. I just started doing my research, just like you would for any doctor. If you need some sort of specialist, you're going to do the research and try to figure out, okay, where should I go? What should I do? So I started doing that research. And because I didn't have a sense of what directly was happening with me, I sought out a clinical therapist, and then I started that journey. And Charles, to your point, it was a very difficult thing to do, even scheduling the first session and everything that led up to that first conversation with the therapist was very anxiety driven. But I believed in the process, and I had faith that if I can submit to this, it's going to help me. So fast forward, like Shanti said, I also had a loss to suicide last year. So that was just, if I wasn't set up to have therapy a year before, I wouldn't know how I would have dealt with that a year ago. So I say all that to say, it's a difficult journey when you're trying to figure out how to have help, but you need help. But I advise, and I would just advise people to take it as, when you're looking for a cardiologist, a podiatrist, same thing with a therapist. Seek out somebody that you think will be a good fit for you, and go from there.
Bob, I think you said you were going to say something next.
Yeah. Mine's all like competition based, right? So, you get in these scenarios and you feel like that working your way up as a kid and all the stuff that you've learned would propel you to the next level. And it did. And then when you get to the top level, just like any other sport or any other profession, you got to bring it when you get to the top level. You got to use all the things that you've learned, and you eventually will run into spots where what you're doing is not good enough. And a lot of it may depend on the situation that you're in, the equipment that you're in, but still, I'm a competitive person, and I feel like, it doesn't matter what I'm in, what car I'm in, what team I'm on, I can go out and win. Well, when that doesn't happen and you go on a 6-7 year hiatus of winning, then the self-doubt really comes in, right? And it's like, okay, I did not see this happening. And what's next? Because I didn't go to college, so I don't have a fallback plan. I'd have to think of something on the fly if this racing thing didn't work out, and the self doubt really could send you down some dark places. So I never had the suicidal thoughts, but just shutting everybody out, not wanting to talk to anybody, and just being lonely, was my way of kind of coping. And I know that's not right because you have so many people that reached out. I'll never forget the day that, I said I was struggling with mental health. And to this day, that was 2019. To this day, people still come up to me, fans, people in the industry, thanking me for, bringing that spotlight to our sport. And I didn't realize how important it was to a lot of people. And, for me, I don't struggle with telling you how I feel when you ask me. It just depends on how much time we got to talk about it or not, but a lot of people struggle with that. And so I think, I went to a couple sessions, a couple different people. And I was, every time I'd go in there, I was like, this is weird, right? This is weird. This is weird. I wasn't trying to shut it out, but I felt like I could not have the personal connection that I was looking for, right? And so that was a struggle for me. But I did take a lot of the workshop items, if you will, that we talked about in those sessions to work on, and they seemed to help. But going there and just venting, and then it's like, all right, see you next week. It's like, man, it's weird, I gotta pay you for this as well. But it's something for me that I've gotten a lot better, and scenarios have changed, the scene has changed for me. We're becoming more competitive now, so it's tough. And I look at a lot of the kids that are coming up and the rookies that are coming up through the series that we know that it's going to be a struggle for them because some of the equipment that they're in or whatever the scenario may be. And so I'll reach out to them like, hey, don't try to overdo it, right? The more you try to overdo it and do something that is not achievable, you start to bring self-doubt on you, and then that just spirals, it's a spiral effect downhill. So just do what you're capable of doing and making the most of the situation every time you're in it, and people will notice that. And so it's quite the process, but everyone kind of goes through it in our industry.
Shanti?
Yes, thank you. The one thing I will just kind of add is, so my family has kind of dealt with, mental health challenges for quite some time. I remember having a cousin when I was a little girl that suffered from schizophrenia, and we would go to his home, and when he would have an episode, my mom said he was having a fit, FIT. I'm like, what is that, Mom? It's like we have, all these stigmas and jargon that we would use in our communities. And instead of calling it what it was, right, we were afraid to name it. We were afraid to, or embarrassed to name something. And so, again, we were very hush about it. So fast forward, having this great career in the music industry, life was going good. But then once I moved up to New York City, I think the year was 2000, and I was in more of a corporate environment. It was very fast paced. Like Bubba had said, once you get into a fast paced business, it's like sink or swim, right? You're playing with the big ladies and big guys, and you got to make it happen. And so my boss at the time, and I held a senior position within the company, but he was very condescending. He yelled all the time, and it was somewhat of a toxic working environment. And he was African American, and that was, even sadder for me. And I thought, not that we all have to support each other, although you would think that, right? But it was a really tough environment for me. And I remember just almost having a meltdown at LaGuardia Airport. And that's the first time that I ever uttered the words, maybe I should just kill myself. And I know sometimes we throw that out there, right? Not meaning it, but it scared me because, like I said, my dad had died by suicide. And for me to say that, and for me to even remotely think it, really brought caution and alarm to me. And so my sister was like, no, you finally really need to go to therapy. You have to deal with this. You shouldn't even be saying stuff like that. So I found a therapist through my company at Sony Music or at Arista Records. And I went for maybe 2 or 3 months, and it was a little weird for me too. Again, referencing what Bubba said, that I didn't know what to expect, and talking to this complete stranger, telling my deep, dark secrets, it was tough and scary at times, but I did it for about 3 months, and then I thought, okay, I'm good. Right. I market the careers of all these superstar artists. Surely I'm fine and I can help myself. So I threw myself back into my work. And so fast forward, the next 3 to 5 years was really tough for me. And I ended up, and I'm a very high achiever, type A personality, worker bee. And I was literally making almost $500,000 a year, corner office, would go into my office and take a nap on a daily basis. Clearly something was wrong because I was showing a pattern of behavioral changes, right? And I was really withdrawing. I didn't want to be there anymore. I'm at the top of my game. Like, people live and dream for these type of jobs, but it didn't matter to me anymore. And I remember being in a taxi one day riding uptown to Harlem for a meeting, and my entire right side, Charles, went numb from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. Freaked me out, of course. Went to several doctors, had all these tests run. I was diagnosed with cervical spinal stenosis, which was some issues with the vertebrae in my spine, but it was all a direct result of stress. And it was causing this anxiety and depression and all these other layers of trauma that I had never dealt with, was just compounding upon one another. And so I ended up quitting and walking away from my career. Toughest decision I've made, but I went back home to Atlanta, Georgia. And the next couple of years, still was sad when trying to figure out what I was going to do with my career, and the fact that I had walked away from it all. And then I remember in 2014, I was about to take a vacation to go see some family friends. And my best friend called me, and she said she was having the worst day of her life. And I said, well, okay, I'm not going to board the plane yet. Let me wait and see what's going on. I get to where I'm going, get a call. 3 hours later, she had shot herself in the head. To say that I blamed myself is an understatement. I rehashed that conversation time and time and time again, trying to figure out what I had missed. And I blamed myself and sent myself into a downward spiral. And that year led to the unpacking of the onion, right? And the layers of what I had not properly dealt with my father. And so it was a tough year for me. And again, my money was funny at that time. You go from making almost $500,000 a year, and that nest egg goes away. And then it's like, what now? I didn't want to go back into the industry because that wasn't a space that I thought was good for me anymore. So long story short, September of 2015, I had counted up all the pills in my medicine cabinet, and I was prepared to take those pills. It was not that I wanted to die. I just wanted the pain to go away. And I didn't know how to stop it. And I kept hearing these voices saying, kill yourself, kill yourself. And so I got out of the house and started driving around town. And I'm a spiritual person, and I don't think it's a universe. I think it was God placing somebody in my path. One of my friends who lives way on the other side of town happened to be at this random store that I just got out and started walking in. I was crying in the store. She immediately knew something was wrong. She convinced me to call my sister, who was like my best friend. And she convinced me to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. And now you can dial 988. So they talked me out of the crisis. And Darlene mentioned the Black community being the community that, we pray our problems away. But on a good note for me, I texted my pastor, Dr. Raphael G. Warnock, who is also Senator Warnock. And he said, I'll pray with you, but you got to get help. You got to go to the doctor this time. And so I did just that. And I saw a psychiatrist, started on my antidepressants. And that was really the turning point for me for taking that step to actually get the help. And I coined this new acronym of RAP, R-A-P. You got to rap through your time. You have to recognize those unfamiliar feelings, accept them, and then be able to process through them with a professional. So until I was able to really wrap through those issues in a healthy way, it was unhealthy coping mechanisms that I was doing. And so I'm just grateful that God allowed me to get the help and to start the organization Silence and Shame. And now we're building an app with Microsoft. We were the NFL Players Association mental health partner during the pandemic. We've done a lot of great things in entertainment and sports, and more importantly, just helping Black folks in the community take good care and understand that mental health is something that we all have. We all have mental health. We may not all have a mental illness.
Yeah, I would 1,000% agree with that. And I really appreciate all of you sharing. I actually resonate with a lot of that because I have an older brother who has recently been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And for the longest time, I think in our family, it's kind of been like that, where it's, hey, he's having a fit, or he's just in one of his moods, or there's no real understanding or answer to why he is like that until we recently found it. But he's significantly older than me, and to the point where it's kind of hard to kind of navigate that space because he's not really receptive to getting advice or help in any way. He thinks he has his own methods of dealing with pain or frustration or whatever the case is, right? And it's difficult to be the other person in that situation too, where you care for that person, you love that person, and you want them to get help, but you don't really know what you can do to help them, you know? And so hearing your stories, that definitely resonates with me from both sides of that. But speaking of that situation, and you talked about it with your friend in terms of telling you about the national hotline, but if you could all speak a little bit about like a person who may have played a key role in you changing your outlook on mental health, or more adding a more willingness for you to, or influence for you to go try and seek help. If you could speak to that, if there's an organization or a group of people or an individual who played a key role in that for you, that'd be great to hear too. We can start with you, Bubba.
Yeah, I talked to somebody local here in the Charlotte area for a couple times, and then our industry has a lot of connections to the different sports leagues and everything. So I went with a psychiatrist from he does a lot of stuff with Seattle Seahawks, Mike Gervais, and he actually flew in and came to the house, and went through a lot of processes to just basically, like Shanti said, wrap it right. Recognize the problems and how to deal with them and different processes. And the biggest thing for me is just breathing, right? Just take a deep breath and take a step back and try to look at it from a different vantage point. And we did some breathing exercises. But the biggest thing is for me is I try to control everything. I'm not a control freak, but in my environment, it's like I want to control the whole process, things that are way out of my control. And it's like when those things happen, they go wrong. That's what drives me up a wall. But it's like, hey man, there's nothing you could do about it. Like, it's obvious, right? But it's like, no, I could have done like this and that. Like I piss off a lot of people and rub them the wrong way because I look at it as me being real. It may come off as pessimistic, but things happen for a reason, right? We have a bad race or we get caught up in an accident. Well, I like to retrace the steps on why we were in that position anyways. We should have been well ahead of it. And so people sometimes don't want to hear that, but it's like, it adds up. There's the receipts right here. We need to be better. If we're put in the scenario again, we have to, be more proactive and not, reactive to the situation. So I think having those conversations, going through those exercises, definitely makes you think. I lay down at night. Sometimes I'm stressed out. I was stressed out Saturday night before our race in St. Louis last night. And I sat there with my wife, and I was sitting there playing video games. And she was doing the same on her iPad, and the games were making me mad, which I get mad at games, whatever, I'm not winning, whatever. Yeah.
100%.
But it was like, oh, you're like really, really mad. And then I realized the problem, like, man, I am in a funk, didn't qualify that great, but it was okay. Like, I was actually proud of myself because I qualified 20th, which isn't great at all. But I was like, it's okay. I know I messed up. It's fine. And I was like, wow, I'm not accepting 20th place, but I am. And it's like, okay, nice. But something was off. We had this was probably the busiest week this past week. We had raced 600 miles on Monday, flew to Michigan, tested for another, I don't know how many hours, how many miles I ran there, and then flew to St. Louis and had practice, had a normal weekend again. So my mind and my body didn't have any time to recover. And so maybe qualifying was a trigger point. I don't know, but I was just so mad. And I got up, I turned the game off, and I was like, hey, babe, I'm in a funk. I'm going to bed. And she's always asking, what's wrong? What are you thinking about? And I'm like, not trying to hide it, but I'm like, I don't know, like nothing. I'm not, I'm just mad. So I go to bed and slept really great and woke up and I was in a good mood. So I think, as I laid down though, it was like, okay, take a deep breath, reset, fall asleep here, try to get some good sleep. and I needed that. So it's just having those instruments and those processes to wrap it again. So
Thank you for sharing. Shanti?
Yeah. So for me, as I mentioned, I leaned on my sister a lot. So when my dad died, my sister was 8.5 years old and I was 7 months. Right. So she was much older at that time. But once we got to be adults, she became like my best friend and confidant and all that. And so she was always there for me, kind of helping us through our mental health journey, because she put herself through counseling when she was in college. And so she really wanted to like break that cycle, right, of unresolved trauma in our family and start changing the narrative of what, healthy conversations look like in the Black family. And so I leaned heavily on her. And we also had another family member that has bipolar 2 disorder and schizoaffective disorder. So like I said, we've been dealing with this as a family for a long time. And so I did really good once I got the help that I needed. And again, starting an organization like Silence and Shame, being able to pour back in the Black community. But in 2019, I lost my sister. And it's still really hard to talk about sometimes. I'm sorry, I choke up because she was like, you got that one person. Like, I never got married. I never had kids. I was a workaholic. But she was that one person that knew me better than anybody. And so when I lost her, and people don't talk enough about the correlation between grief and your mental health journey, it really set me back. And I just thought a lot about her and how she would want me to go on and carry on with life. So I did start seeking therapy and counseling again. And it took me a while. And that's something that sometimes we feel like we can't see a counselor that doesn't look like us. And so initially I didn't have an African-American therapist, and, they were fine. They helped me a little bit, but I did feel like they didn't kind of understand me. And so I spent the time searching for the right therapist. And my mom had Alzheimer's and she lived in Charlotte. So I would come back and forth from Atlanta to Charlotte all the time to care for my mom because in her facility. And then I lost her last year. And so I'm back in therapy and I'm proud of it. And it was probably the most consistent time I've been in therapy, almost 2 years, dealing with the grief and loss on top of my own anxiety and looking at my own mortality, losing my sister at such a young age. And so it's that commitment that I made to myself. And I also set up personal and professional boundaries. When I'm not feeling something, and if I am stressed out, I'm not going to go. I can't be at every event. I can't show up for every speaking engagement because I speak globally now about, my mental health journey and the work that I do with Silence and Shame, and now doing this work with Johnson & Johnson. And it just gets tough. And I tell people, no is a complete sentence.
Yeah.
Like I have to have healthy ways to cope. I go out and I take walks, and I just find ways that are healthy for me to keep my mental health and wellness like at the forefront of everything, because health is everything. Mental, physical health is health. And people in the Black community joke about getting to the bag, making the money. Health is the bag. Good mental health is the real bag, right? And it's the key to all of us being here and living productive lives.
So we left off on talking about key individual or influential people in our mental health journey and how they might have played a significant role in where you are today with mental health, or even how you perceive or have an outlook about mental health. So if you could talk about that as well, Darlene, that'd be helpful.
Sure. I would say there wasn't a specific person. For me, it was more so similar to what Shanti was saying, as far as having the commitment to my health for myself and to break generational curses, right? So for me, it was more so observing family members, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, just internally have mental health issues and concerns. And to your point, Charles, even speaking about your brother, where you want to suggest certain things, you want to offer solutions, but at the end of the day, it is ultimately on that person to accept that help. So seeing that and being around that, even within my own family dynamic, working in human resources, throughout the pandemic, at this time, I was working for one of the major medical systems out of New Jersey. And throughout the pandemic, we started to see a huge influx in employees going out on leave. So because I had already started my own journey with wellness and therapy and doing other things to help my mental health, even exercising, eating well, sleeping, all these things. And then you look at it in the workforce and you start to see an uptick of people going out on FMLA because they have their own mental health that they need, that they're starting to recognize that they need help. So for me, being an advocate in that space, it was really important for me, and still to this day, to be the voice for the voiceless, and to help some of our previous generations. I am a millennial, by the way, so our Gen X and our baby boomers understand, it's a new day. It's a new day. Working our fingers to the bone is unhealthy. If people need to go out on leave, how do we navigate us having a shortage in our workforce planning? How do we get better at that? How do we get ahead of the curve? So in leadership, we're not sitting here like, oh, this person's out on leave, or, this person's having mental health issues, and people look at it as though it's not something that should be considered or have compassion for. So for me, I say, there wasn't a specific person. It was really the commitment to myself, and also the commitment that I had in my career to influence the importance of wellness and mental health, and taking care of yourself.
Great. So obviously within the Black community, there's various barriers to entry to certain access to healthcare in general, but of course also mental health care. So I think personally that plays a major role into why the communities might have been against or is more hesitant towards seeking mental health, or even viewing that as a viable option for them. What do you say to that, especially, in today's society where, financial resources tend to be limited for a certain group of people or a certain tax bracket, et cetera. So like, there's a lot of people who may not have the financial resources or ability to get mental health, and since there's significantly more of them than those who don't, in terms of the haves and have-nots. How do you kind of reconcile your thought process or your outlook on things when it comes to the Black community specifically with mental health and access?
Okay. So, so for me, I actually was someone who used to say, I can't afford therapy. I can't, and I have come from the hood, the projects, Section 8, low income housing, food stamps. I was raised in that environment. So I always had Medicaid or like free insurance. And even then, during those times, for me, I would say the best thing I would say for people that are in financial situations where they feel like they can't afford something, the best thing you can do is research. Because even with free insurance or no insurance, there are counselors out there that you can talk to for free. There are, free resources out there. I think it's all about doing the research and finding them. And then when I became financially able, I still had that mindset of, I can't afford this. I have bills. I can't allocate money to this. And, and I have other things that are right in front of me that I have to deal with every day. But once I, again, got into human resources and started to find out what my company could even offer me, I started there with EAP, with the Employee Assistance Program, started getting some free sessions. That started to open up the gate to what is actually out there. And I think that is what holds us back as a community, is that a lot of times we don't know what our options are. So we already feel limited. We already feel like we don't have access because we don't have access. So for me, I think the biggest thing is to continue to, again, talk about it and create awareness, and what are those different avenues that you can explore, even if you don't have the financial bandwidth to do so.
Yeah. Shanti?
I'll just quickly add to that. Everything that Darlene said was spot on. I think, we're having this conversation, right? It's around Juneteenth, and we're celebrating from 1865, right? When enslaved African Americans were freed in this country. But in my opinion, and what I've done, in my personal opinion, just from a research perspective, mental health resources were not meant for Black Americans out the gate. When you think about slavery over 400 years ago, when a slave was seeking freedom and they were caught by their master, there was a term called drapetomania. And the slave master would say that the slave that was trying to get freed had a mental illness, right? So we were deemed mentally ill just because we wanted to be free back in the first days of slavery. And so that's ridiculous, right, in and of itself. And so fast forward to present day, there's still such a lack of access to healthcare. And most people, you know, some folks in the Black community, if you have healthcare, sometimes you have to get, you know, a mental health rider, right, put on in addition to your regular healthcare benefits. So out the gate, you may not be able to afford that. You don't find as many, obviously, hospitals and urgent care in Black communities, just like they're food deserts. I think they're healthcare deserts in our communities. And so lack of access is everywhere. And then you start thinking about corporate America and microaggressions that we face as African Americans in the workplace sometimes is ridiculous. Suddenly, especially during the pandemic, every Black person in a white company is the DE&I expert. No, sir, there are experts for that. That's why we hire people. That's why people like Darlene exist within corporate America to help you understand, right, what's going on and with the nuances of our community. So when these employers, you know, they say they care about the healthcare of all of their employees, but they don't want to talk about racism in the workplace, or they don't want to hold these special conversations. You know, they need to have mental health champions in the workspace. They need more of these safe spaces and these types of conversations with people that look like people in the Black community, you know, folks sharing lived experiences like we're doing here today. People like Darlene who are DE&I experts, or that you can bring in outside firms that can really thoughtfully put together wellness plans and strategies, not just on Juneteenth, not just in the month of May for mental health awareness. You need to change the culture of what good mental health care looks like on a regular basis. And so I push people towards all these types of resources like NAMI and, you know, therapyforblackgirls.com, therapyforblackmen.org. And so we just got to keep fighting, as Darlene said. We got to keep pushing. We have to keep normalizing these conversations and really uplifting people like a Bubba Wallace, who, you know, is someone that's in the public eye, but that is vulnerable and transparent and sharing what's going on. And even when we're on social media, utilizing this phone, you know, scrolling, you know, I have the 3 Ds of social media. First of all, for me, I need discipline on social media, because if I'm continuously scrolling, sometimes that can have a negative effect on my mental health and what I'm dealing with, especially as a Black person. And also, the second D is discernment. Is what I'm looking at good for me? And the third D is delightful. Is it going to feed my soul or break my soul? And so trying to create these healthy environments of care that we can do within our communities, I think, is key. And then the last thing I'll add is that folks in the workplace really need to understand that sometimes Black folks are just tired. And they need these safe spaces, and they need these conversations, and they need these affinity groups. It's not like we're trying to divide. We're not trying to divide. And I know sometimes some senior level employees can feel like you're not being inclusive when you're doing so many things that separate for so many groups, but also put yourself in the shoes of the group. So I ask the employees and that the nation gives Black folks a little grace when it comes to trauma, institutionalized racism, and things that we have to deal with, and how that affects our emotional health and wellness. And then we in turn do the work and get the help that we need, and not be afraid to seek therapy and help.
Bubba?
Yeah, I mean, they really nailed it on the head. I think, you know, I can relate to the social media stuff. Rewind a couple months ago, you know, I wrecked out early, like lap 7 the first week, and then lap 8 the next, back to back, bam. And what's crazy is you build up so much confidence from the previous year. The way we ended last year was really, really strong, right? And it's like, okay, this is gonna be our best year yet. And it ends up being kind of the same trend as the last 6 years that I've been in Cup. And it's like, what the hell, right? It's like, man, I've come into this, and I feel focused, I feel ready, and we're 25th in points, whatever it may be. And so after the last time I crashed out, right, I was so mad, I was frustrated, and I was like, something's got to change. And the biggest thing is my parents text me, and mind you, I haven't said it, but a lot of trauma came from my parents' divorce in 2016. The biggest thing was my dad and I really lost touch with each other. Like we did not like each other, and so we're on the mends now. It's been better the last couple of years, but that had a lot to do with it. But anyways, my parents text my sister as well. You know, my dad was like, "Hey man, you don't need to be so hard on yourself." Yeah, I get that. My sister is, you know, it's okay. Everything's gonna work out for a reason. And I'm hard. My manager, my best friend, he says I'm hard at accepting like compliments. You know, it's like I kind of blow it off, right? And then my mom had texted me, "Hey, you know, you're in a rough patch, but if you want something to change, then you got to change yourself." And she has said that before, right? And you just kind of blow it off. And I was like, "Yep, okay." And so we landed at like 11:30 that night, and I got a little gym set up outside in my garage outside, and went out there and worked out for an hour. Basically, threw away all the junk food in my pantry, and I've been working out on the regulars for the last that was since March, and I was a person that, you know, what does a race car driver do to change? And I'm like, don't ask me. I don't work out. I eat junk food, and it's like, you know, for me, it's the timing of it, right? The minute you start changing that, the results come in, and it's like, oh, of course. Now all my trainers and everybody that's telling me that to work out, they're gonna be like, see, told you. Like this, it's like, no, it's bull crap. No, it's just I finally got my stuff together on the racetrack, but it all kind of goes hand in hand. But the social media aspect, I got off social media, and I still I have it back, right? I got it back, but there's been, you know, a lot of things that I've genuinely been curious about, and the one thing that I try not to do is read the comments about myself. I mean, you know, it's crazy. Anytime I'm posted about, people come out with pitchforks and knives, and they're ready, right? So I've gotten away from that, but I do still spend a somewhat unhealthy amount on social media, whether it's just scrolling and just seeing what's up, but changing my perspective on that, because I used to care. Like I remember going back in high school, and I had to be in the best outfits and whatnot. And then my senior year, you know, I was like, man, I'm going in basketball shorts and t-shirt and socks and sandals. That was it. And I was like, oh, no one cares, right? It's like, okay, I need to stop caring so much. Well, then I went through a couple years like that. But then like we talked about earlier, uh, when the results started not showing up, I started to care again about what people thought about me. And so reading that stuff, and that would send you down a spiral too. So I think just limiting your time to the important things, the task at hand. You know, everything else is just a distraction. You know, limit your distractions and enjoy life. There's so much more outside of your phone. You know, everything. I look at kids now, and they're invested in iPads, and it's like, man, get outside and play and do those things that we used to do when we were kids. And so it's a crazy time now, but you know, you gotta limit yourself to the unhealthy things that you put in front of your face.
So I think that's interesting, and it's funny as a parent too, right? Like part of me is like, yeah, get outside, go do stuff, but then like the other part of me is like, hey, but now at least I know you're safe in here with the iPad
Yeah.
and stuff like that. You know, so it's like it's kind of hard to juggle that, because even that's a mental health thing too, because like that's an anxiety as a parent. Like I'm worried about what might happen to my kid if they go outside versus me knowing they're here. But then it's like now I have to worry about what they're viewing and what they're learning about, or what kind of information they're retaining from whatever it is they're doing on their iPad. So it's definitely a weird environment and place to
It's
be
a
in.
fine line there, Charles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's a balance that it requires. And then for some folks in the Black community, the other side of that balance, in addition to talking to your therapist, having a good group of folks around you that you like Bubba said, kind of staying off social media. And then that's when your faith actually comes into play. Because I tell people sometimes it's not one or the other. It doesn't have to be, oh, if I go to therapy, I can't pray. You know, to me, it's hashtag, you know, therapy and faith. And so my faith is the one thing that keeps me going. I'm afraid. I live in Atlanta. You know, crime is up in Atlanta. It's still a great place to live. I got family in Charlotte. But it's a scary world we're living in right now. Every day is something different that's going on. And as Black people, we have this heightened sense of anxiety because life be lifing, as I like to say. And so it's tough and it's scary at times, but that's when you have to rely on your faith. Like, after losing my sister and my mom, I just wanted to shut it all down. But I feel like God kept me here for a reason. And so we can't live in fear. And so that is where that balance comes into play as a parent, you know, as a race car driver, as a DEI expert, as a mental health founder and nonprofit and radio show host. We have to lean on these things that are all positive, right? And that creates healthy ways for us to cope as Black Americans and as Americans, as we kind of continue to kind of navigate this thing, because the mental health conversation is not going anywhere. Every time you turn on the news and something happens, unfortunately, whoever did it, it's always a mental health conversation. And that's another podcast or another interview for another day, because I have some questions about that. But I do feel like this conversation is a huge topic, but that's why it's important that, you know, these narratives are being shared and that we share information from a lived experience perspective so that we can all bounce off of one another. Because I'm certainly, you know, enlightened and empowered from Darlene and Bubba and even just what you said as a parent, Charles. We got to talk to one another. You know, that's why my organization, Silence to Shame, started this initiative called Silence to Shame Sunday Dinners, where we go and we host dinners, but we have these authentic conversations about mental health at the dinner table. Something we all love to do, whether it's a completely healthy meal laced with kale and sea bass, or if we want to fry up some chicken and eat some collard greens. We're going to talk about mental health in a way that's more palatable for Black folks. And so we just got to keep the conversations going.
Yeah. So we're going to be wrapping up soon. So I have two questions I really want to ask you guys before we end. I'll kind of try to put them together. So the first question is, can you share a positive or even negative experience that you've had specifically with a mental health professional in terms of, you know, you seeking out that help that you may have needed? And if it was negative, what did you do to kind of cope with that or transition to another person? And if it was positive, what do you think was the biggest thing you got out of that? Or what did they do that was better than other experiences you had with others?
Do you mind if I jump in this one?
Sure.
So this is such a great question, because I think this is also a reason or what makes Black people hesitant about seeking therapy. So I will say my first therapist that I had, she was clinical. And in the beginning, our sessions were going well. And during that time, similar to Bubba, I was suffering from my parents' divorce. And the result of that, my relationship with my mom started to be estranged. So I sought out a Black woman as a therapist to talk to her about these issues that I was having. And we ended up having it wasn't a positive session that we had when she was talking to me about some of the ways to navigate the relationship with my mom. And her demeanor started to shift as though she was mothering me and not being a therapist. So for me, that was a turnoff. And it's like, well, I'm coming to you to talk to you and get counsel for these issues, but you're counseling me as if you are my mom. So now I have to shift gears and I found a new therapist. From that day, I said, you know what? This person has served their purpose for me. We had a great time together, but I think it's time for me to move on. Something similar to, when you go to the doctor as a child, you have your pediatrician and then you move on to someone else. So now, fast forward, the therapist that I have now, to Shanti's point, she is a licensed counselor, but she's also a spiritual advisor. So I get 2 in 1. And I think once I found her, another Black woman, in her approach to therapy it was just something that worked for me. So I will say I still meet with her today. Shout out to Sheraton. And you start to build a bond with your therapist where they know how to work with you, and it's not a one size fits all approach or style. And for me, I think that's what has shifted my experience with therapy, because it's very positive now.
Bubba?
Yeah, I haven't, from the negative side, my first guy was local here, and I, I don't really have anything negative to say, but it just didn't click, right?
Yeah.
And then when we brought in Mike, he, like I said, he came to the house, flew in all the way from, I think he's in Seattle, on the West Coast, and he flew in, and it was just him and I sitting here talking, and we were chopping it up, and I remember him telling me, we got through basically the whole day, and he was like, "You weren't going to do any of this shit, are you?" And I sat there and laughed, and I was like, man, the conversation was great, but there's something telling me, like, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this. And I don't know if that's like the toughness side of me, like, saying that, but I'm just like, I told him, like, man, I think this is like foo-foo. I don't know why, like, no disrespect to you, but I just sit here and I'm like, is it over yet? But it's funny, I still do some of the breathing exercises, so he's a little bit wrong. But I remember him specifically telling me that, you're not going to do any of this shit, are you? So both of them were positive. Just the first one versus the second guy, I just clicked more with the second, because he had worked with athletes before. He'd worked with the coaching staff and a lot of high end people, and so it was a different kind of outlook on things versus the first guy. So don't really have much to offer there, but I just thought it was funny that he said that. He kind of he could read it. He's like, I could already see it. You're not going to do this.
Yeah. Okay. Shanti?
I'll just briefly add, so my first encounter with a therapist was, as I mentioned, when I lived up in New York City in the early 2000s. And that's the first time I'd actually talked to anyone. She was an older white female, very nice lady. It was weird for me too, similar to Bubba, because although I'm, not a celebrity, I work around celebrities all the time, and just being in a high-paced industry like the music industry, I was like, I don't need this. Like, okay, what can this lady really tell me about my life, and what can she do? But it was the first time that I thought, it's actually okay to kind of talk to someone that's objective and doesn't really know me, and that can kind of offer me some different, sorts of opinions and so forth. I didn't do as much of the homework either, because my schedule was so hectic and I was always jumping on and off a plane, but I did get through it, right? And so fast forward, my next encounter with really going to therapy was after I had my suicidal ideation. First, I went to see a psychiatrist, and I did not combine medicine with talk therapy. It was just the medication for me. And it was me kind of openly talking about it on social media, as I mentioned, and starting this organization. So the advocacy work really kind of poured into me in a therapeutic type of way, so to speak. And so once I did start kind of courting, if you will, different therapists, I saw I saw a older white male, didn't mesh at all. I think that I still had some anxiety also from just dealing with a lot of older white men in the entertainment industry that always felt like I was, the little Black girl who just, Shanti, cute little Shanti, which drove me crazy. And I felt like I always had to work twice as hard, and I had to know more than them. And we had equal titles, and they were making more than me or double my salary. And so it was all those microaggressions and things that I hadn't unpacked from the corporate side of the entertainment industry. So he didn't work out for me at all. And so finally did some homework. And I tell people now, like, therapy is a little bit like dating, although I'm a terrible dater. But you got to keep swiping a couple times until you find the right one and find the right fit for you. And that's what I did. And now I have this amazing African-American female who happens to be from Atlanta, Georgia. We speak the same language. We know some of the same people. And she just allows me to kind of talk, and she gives me homework. Because the other thing, I think there's a misconception, especially in our community, that a therapist, is just going to fix you all of a sudden, right? You hurt your shoulder and you need to put it back into place. It's not like that. You can't just snap, yourself back into place, and you might have, chemical imbalances and different things going on. So it takes some time. So therapy is what you get out of it. And that's what I tell people. And that's what I try to do now. Like, I actually do the homework. I journal some, although journal's not my best thing that I do, but I try to find ways that I can actually incorporate what my therapist is telling me, because it's like anything else in life. And so I just have a different outlook on what therapy means in my life. And I'm happy with it now, but don't knock it till you try it, is all I can tell anyone listening today. And if you encounter a bad therapist, please don't let that be the end of you actually seeking help and finding somebody, because you'll eventually find someone that clicks, and it'll work out for you.
That's a perfect segue into my final question. My last question was going to be, what advice do you give to someone who may be hesitant or unsure about seeking help from a mental health professional or mental support in general?
I think find someone that, like Shanti said, with her therapist now, they speak the same language. They know a lot of people. Being yourself is the biggest thing. Like, yeah, maybe your first encounter, your first session, you're gonna go in timid and you're gonna think this is weird or foo-foo, right? But the quicker you can be yourself, allows you to speak from the heart and not sugarcoat anything. Yeah, you might find yourself rambling, but you might have a lot of stuff packed in there and built up that you need to get out, right? So I think natural conversations are the best conversations. Those are the ones, you know. I do a lot of interviews. I do a lot of Zoom calls, and my PR team will always ask, "How'd that one go?" It's like, y'all were on there for forever, and I'm like, yeah, it was good because it was natural conversation. You know, when you're just sitting there spitting facts and keeping it real with each other, then it's okay. But it's like, well, how does it feel to go fast and turn left? Then I'm like, okay, like this is obvious, right? But when you can get away from your everyday life and talk about life, that's important for me. So I would encourage everybody to find someone that can allow them to be themselves and have natural conversations.
I would add that you know, if you are hesitant with seeking professional help in therapy space, I would think of it in a sense of don't wait until it's too late, which a lot of us in the community do have that, where we may not go to the doctor unless we know that it's too late or we're in physical pain. So when you think about all of your life experiences, trauma included, um, think through, you know, what do you envision for your life? How do you want to feel every day when you wake up? What type of life do you want to live? And if it takes you to Shanti's point, to look at it like dating, you know, a lot of single people are dating. So the same thing with finding a therapist. Find somebody that works for you. You may not get it right the first time, just like doctors. But you just keep doing the research until you find someone who meshes with your personality and you feel safe with. Again, being safe is going to allow you to be vulnerable, and go in it with an open mind. Don't go into it with already preconceived notions of what this is going to be like. Because I remember my first session, it was nerve wracking. I was anxious. I didn't know what to do, but I committed to the process and I just told myself, go in it, relax, and submit to the process. And whatever outcome you get is what you get, but don't be so worried about trying to control how this is going to go. So that's what I would say to someone who may be a little reluctant, because it's not, we're still learning this, right? This is new for us. So anything new is going to feel uncomfortable. But I would just say, you know, continue to put up the good fight and you know, and really put your mental health at the forefront, because when you do, you will live a better, happier, healthier life.
And lastly, I'll just add, first of all, just give yourself a little grace. Rome wasn't built in a day. And this journey to wellness, health and wellness, both physical and mental, can be a daunting task, I think, for most folks. And especially you're talking about people in the Black community where it's still so stigmatized, even criminalized, right? Another conversation, another Zoom for another day, but there is, you know, criminalization of, you know, mental illness in our community as well. But just find somebody to talk to initially. It could be a friend. It could be, you know, your partner, your life partner, your spouse, your best friend, So just kind of start there, even if you're not feeling like yourself, because the important key is opening up to someone. But you're not looking to these folks to be quote unquote experts, right? So you're just kind of dipping your little toe into the water if you can't swim. So start there. And then the other thing I'll say is, like anything in life, it requires practice and research, right? You want a job. Back in the day, I wanted to work in music or entertainment. I had to get an internship, right? I had to start somewhere. So I would say start, and this is a good way you can use social media. Start following some of these Black mental health therapy organizations, and there's some really great Black therapists out there. One that I love is Dr. Spirit. Her IG is Talk, the number 2 Spirit, or Dr. Ayanna Abrams, or organizations like Black Men Heal or Therapy for Black Girls. It's so many different organic and natural feel-good conversations, as Bubba said, like feeling comfortable with these folks that are openly sharing and openly talking about therapy and wellness and healthy ways to cope. So kind of start immersing yourself into the wellness culture on social media. Like I said, it's so many organizations and groups and folks that are speaking around Black mental health in our community. And I think that might make you a little bit more comfortable. And the last thing I'll say is get yourself a starting 5, right? We're in the NBA finals are going on. You can't start a game without 5 folks on the court, right? Who's in your starting 5? Find 5 people that you can trust, that are confidants, that can help you along this wellness journey. Or if you're having a bad day, that maybe they'll drive you to therapy, or maybe you can talk to them. But it should be your therapist or a coach or a manager or a best friend or an agent or a D&I expert like Darlene, or, you know, a best friend in your head like Bubba. Even though they might know you, he might be your best friend in your head. But listen to folks and allow them into your space. But have 5 good people you can count on around your mental health journey, and don't be afraid to take this journey. I'm glad I took this journey so I could be on this call today, and I didn't take my own life in 2015. So you got to let folks in, people. You can't be afraid to get the help that you need.
This was amazing, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time. I want to thank you each personally. I also would like to thank Walmart, Johnson & Johnson, and DraftKings. But this was phenomenal, and I really feel like I learned a lot. And I'm hoping that people who view this and watch this will feel the same way, and we can adhere. Bye, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. I appreciate
it. It was great meeting you all. Continue
Likewise.
success.
Yes. Likewise. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you.